Thatcher's political abilities are often praised with an unwavering, unshaken certainty, as if people were talking about gravity. Sometimes, just for fun, I ask these people why they think Thatcher was such a master of politics. There tends to be three forms of responses. 1, they will talk about how Thatcher won free elections. 2, they will list things that she was able to achieve while Prime Minister. Or 3, they will mumble incoherently or scoff at me for even asking this question. But surely this is the most important question of all to ask. Every single Prime Minister of the UK, from John Major to Keir Starmer, has paid lip service to this woman. It is part of the establishment's official political history. Thatcher was even given a ceremonial funeral, which was so grand that it seemed like a state funeral in all but name. This woman is a bedrock for the ruling class. Respecting her without question would be to respect their narrative, rather than forge another one. Yet, once we stop respecting their narrative, they'll start to feel the ground slipping beneath their feet. Now, this is not to say that we should engage in whimsical post-truth fantasies without foundational grounding in reality. That would make everything we say suspect and insubstantial. But we don't need to. We don't even need to prove that Thatcher was a bad politician. All we need to do is to remind people of facts which problematise their devotion to Thatcher as somehow unimpeachable. This unintentionally happened at certain moments in the mostly glorifying film The Iron Lady, which juxtaposed dramatisations of Thatcher's time as leader of the Conservative Party with material based on her personal life and later decline into dementia. Seeing Thatcher as human, even pitiful, rankled people on the right. When questioned, David Cameron, then the Conservative Party leader and the Prime Minister, said this.
It's the weekend that the movie The Iron Lady about Margaret Thatcher opens. I don't know whether you've
I've seen it, yes. It's a fantastic piece of acting by Meryl Streep, but you can't help wondering why do we have to have this film right now? It is a film much more about ageing and elements of dementia rather than about an amazing Prime Minister. And my sort of sense was a great piece of acting, really staggering piece of acting, but a film I wish they could have made another day.
His irritation is palpable. He did not want to see Thatcher portrayed as a human with real, banal biological struggles. He wanted to see her depicted as a heroic leader. But nevertheless, The Iron Lady was ultimately quite respectful. Its principal subversion of the image of Thatcher was precisely not political. This makes it quite easy for people to dismiss. They can separate the personal from the political. When questioning people, we need to find a way to shake Thatcher's political image more directly, to see within it her pitiful human mismatch with the respect granted to her. And this can be done by examining both her electoral record and her political record. Thatcher was the leader of the Conservative Party when it won 3 elections in 1979, 1983 and 1987. The UK is not a presidential system. Voters do not elect a Prime Minister directly. Only members of her constituency, Finchley, ever voted for Thatcher herself. A national Conservative majority is not a personal mandate for the party leader in the same way it is in other countries. Now, Thatcher's popularity in between elections was not consistent. Often, the public were highly critical of her. Nevertheless, the Conservative Party and Thatcher herself both managed to recover in the polls as each general election approached. If you look at the election results, you'll see that Thatcher's Conservative Party never secured more than 43.9% of public support, which was achieved during the 1979 general election. This led to them winning a small majority of 334 seats. Yet at the 1983 general election, despite their public support declining to just over 42%, their share of the seats increased to 397. Why? Principally because of the emergence of the SDP, a centrist split from Labour, which allied with the Liberal Party. The alliance took about 10% of public support from Labour and 1.5% of public support from the Conservatives. The alliance held 25.4% of the public vote, but only 23 out of 650 seats. It's not simply that if Labour had retained this 10% of public support, they would have won the 1983 general election, but the SDP was part of a larger problem. It precipitated a rebellion by the right of the Labour Party. The right opportunistically mobilised the crisis in confidence that occurred at the end of the 1970s to try to reorient the party. This schism severely damaged the credibility of Labour as an opposition throughout Thatcher's time as leader. What is more, the factors that led to this crisis within the Labour Party were instrumental in the Conservative 1979 election victory. The global economic turmoil of the 1970s damaged Labour's credibility. By 1979, after years of minority government and the IMF crisis, much of the electorate no longer trusted Labour to manage the economy. The effect lasted well into the 1980s. It allowed the Conservatives, as the ruling party, to appear as relatively stable. In sum, the Conservative victories were also the product of factors beyond their own control. Thatcher's success followed global economic crises, and her party looked favourable in large part due to the relative disunity of the opposition. Of course, there are many nuances to the situation, but even at this broad brushstroke level, we can see that Thatcher's electoral record is not beyond question. If, for example, the Labour Party in the 1980s had managed to better reconcile and suppress divisions, history might have turned out differently.
I just don't think we can ask the poorest of the poor to pay the same amount of tax as a multimillionaire.
There you go again, why not?
So what of those people who suggest Thatcher ought to be praised for nevertheless effectively running the country? There are multiple ways to approach this. In parliamentarian terms, Thatcher had 4 Commons defeats. Blair had the same number. Both governed with substantial majorities, so legislative success largely reflected arithmetic. Notably, while through 1945 to 1950, Clement Attlee experienced no defeats because of his party's decisive majority. Also, during his second ministry from 1950 to 1951, he experienced 4 defeats, albeit on minor issues. At this time, his majority was just 5. So it's fair to say that Thatcher's parliamentary record is not especially exceptional. At this stage, it might be said that, nevertheless, Thatcher, as leader of the Conservative Party, oversaw changes in the country in a way quite unlike others before or since. She made decisions which others could not have. Here is where a more critical perspective allows us to bring a certain level of clarity. We must insist that these two statements do not necessarily follow one another. Thatcher was indeed the Prime Minister who oversaw a tremendous rebalancing of British society towards the favour of capital, enacting the neoliberal shift which had been theorised in the 1970s by the Institute of Economic Affairs, among others. Her government sold council houses to residents without replacing stock, which led to the loss of public sector assets and allowed for today's renting culture to emerge. After fueling a deep recession in the early 1980s through her tight monetarist policies, she villainised the trade unions and coal miners while descaling UK industry without providing alternative employment, which contributed massively to an increase in poverty and wealth inequality that characterised her premiership. It was not only miners and unions that Thatcher would marginalise to distract from the devastating impacts of her economic policies for ordinary people in this country. Thatcher's hardline policies against Northern Irish dissidents fueled sectarian divisions and anti-British sentiment. Her government's introduction of what is known as Section 28 also emboldened homophobia in the heat of the AIDS crisis. To top it off, she resisted sanctions against South Africa's apartheid regime. But even if people think that successfully implementing this programme is somehow objectively good, simply because of how much it changed this country, can Thatcher really be credited with uniquely being able to realise such an agenda? Reagan in the United States, Mulroney in Canada, and Kohl in West Germany pursued comparable market-oriented reforms. In France, Mitterrand famously abandoned his early socialist programme in 1983 and pivoted to austerity and liberalisation. Thatcher was simply not uniquely capable. She was aligned with a wider international turn towards deregulation, privatisation, and reduced state intervention. In material terms, all that separates Mitterrand from Thatcher is that the so-called Iron Lady was already converted to what was then the newest form of capital. To praise Thatcher for enacting her agenda is not to highlight a singular achievement, but to realise how she was a glove for capital. So, both electorally and politically, Thatcher was in the right place at the right time. She was at the head of the Conservative Party when faced with a disunified opposition following a period of economic instability and crisis, and was then able to realise a neoliberal policy agenda in the UK that resembled similar projects across the world. History is all too often written by the winners. Calling her an objectively good politician might just be to take the side of history's winners and to affirm how things have gone. If someone chooses to praise Thatcher in these terms, perhaps it'll be worth them taking a moment to think again, and perhaps considering the importance of thinking that things could be otherwise.